Hey, recruiting enthusiasts, I'm Priyanka, and welcome to Tech Recruiting Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for gaining all the insider knowledge about the top recruiters in the tech industry. On this week's episode, I'm pleased to welcome Ajay Krishnankutty, who's the Vice President, Talent Acquisition at Siemens Healthineers. An industry veteran with over 2 decades of experience, Ajay possesses a strong knowledge of talent acquisition and talent management. Welcome to the podcast, Ajay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Priyanka.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. How are you doing today, Ajay?
All very good, actually, Priyanka. Happy that we are still going strong on the healthineers side, but also in a way very bad day for the industry because of the layoffs which are happening in Meta. So just want to kind of spend a bit of time in terms of the during our conversations too, but going on very well.
Great. So before we begin, can you share with us a bit about yourself? And I'm curious to know what sparked your passion for this industry and how it all started.
Great question, Priyanka. Priyanka, I've been, like I mentioned, been on the talent management and talent acquisition space for the last 21, 22 odd years. Uh, Started as a IT developer long time back, right after college. Then realized that the passion lies with human contact, and then made switches across to the HR segment, and specifically on the talent management and talent acquisition segment. Um, Over the last 2 decades, I've been working with companies like Siemens Healthineers, which is my current employer, with Legato, which was my the last employer before this. Companies like IG, which were actually very unique business across the world, with Concentrix, with UST. So there are a couple of logos which are attached to my name. And it has been fun because most of them have been helping grow companies and also attracting the right talent from the industry for growth of these companies, right? And thankfully, all the companies that I have touched have grown significantly well, which is really good from a career standpoint of view. Healthiness has been a great journey because healthcare is very close to my heart, and that's what I've been thriving because in the last 20 odd years that I've been working in the industry, around 18 to 17 years has been purely focused on healthcare domain, and that's my core forte of experience. um, but looking back at the past, right, it's all the learnings that we have actually got through multiple segments. I've worked in almost like 42 odd countries across the world in this last couple of years, predominantly from a talent acquisition standpoint of view. um, I have also worked in outside India in US for a couple of years. I've spent a significant amount of years helping talent management and talent acquisition over there, but decided to return back to India, considering how the market has been booming out here, and also uh, contribute more to the India market. So the last 12 years predominantly in Bangalore, but traveling quite a bit for from a work related standpoint of view. And it's been great, Priyanka, so far from an acquisition standpoint of view. Why talent acquisition? Because one, I like meeting and greeting people, understanding their career journeys. IT has always been close to me. I'm more of a very, even though I left coding long time back, the passion towards tech is very high. So tech savvy that way, if you ask me, like all the best of like whichever gadgets that you can think about, I keep shuffling with them just to figure out how things are going. Still can roll up my sleeves and code even now. So I've been not lost touch with coding, if you really ask me about that. And most importantly, helping people find the right career paths, right? That helps other people and touches other people's lives. So that's been one of the key passions that why I've been sticking across to this industry with all the passion.
Awesome. So you've had a great journey so far, and I'm eager to hear and learn from your experiences.
Mhm.
So, as a part of your role, you're always expected to anticipate the industry trends and stay on top of it as well, and keep up to date with the market, for securing the best talent. And I understand talent sourcing is tough, especially for the hard to fill in roles or the niche roles. And I want to know how you go about it and how does the strategy vary for, say, entry level positions to executive level positions? And what methods you have found to be successful so far that you think people should definitely try out?
Great, Pinga. I have to bifurcate my answer into a couple of points in terms of that. Reason being, each hire is very different when we really think about that, right? So the strategy keeps changing depending on the kind of hires that you're doing. For example, my strategy when you're hiring for a volume hiring would be very different from when I'm doing an executive search, right? I'll start from the top down. Executive search predominantly requires a lot of homework to be done. Really strong market mapping is very critical because those profiles generally don't apply for jobs. Correct? They may not even see a job advertisement if you put there. I'm talking about the right candidates that we need to hire. So always been a fan of mapping of talent when it comes to senior hiring and also super niche hiring. So uh, in the tech world, there is a lot of technologies that are very, very niche, super niche, which are rarely in the market. Well, just a handful of people that may be available. And whenever you start your hiring managers are very nice to you in terms of putting a lot of constraint on your hiring, right? They will give you 10 different um, roadblocks, which may even narrow the entire pool of candidates for you. So whenever such kind of hiring starts, it's always first thing is not just jumping into posting a job or advertising a job. Priyanka. I generally, even myself, and also I put my team also into that, or rather teach them in terms of how to do that too, in terms of making sure that we map the talent very clearly and then go about research so that we target actually our people in the right way and then we reach out. Like even like a month back, we were hiring some senior positions within Healthineers. Um, we went about the same approach, and trust me, those yield a lot of answers very fast because when we did our mapping, we suddenly realized that the pool itself was hardly some 40 people across India. And we reached out to them and find from that we got around 4 or 5 shortlist. And trust me, in 45 to 50 days time, we could reach an offer for those kind of roles. So mapping is very critical. And also how the industry trend works, right? Connecting to your peers in the industry is very critical because you gain a lot of knowledge. There are so much of technology domains out there that we may not even be aware of as talent acquisition leaders. So networking is very, very critical as a leader in the industry, not just for talent acquisition. I'm generally speaking, as somebody who goes about hiring people for their team, knowledge of market is very critical. In the last 2 years, I've been also a big fan of buy and build, um, because the market has drastically changed in the last 2.5 years time. Right after the pandemic struck us, India market has been booming. Technologies of highest demand. You have more jobs than the number of people out there. So which means that unless and otherwise you are upskilling certain people out there or maybe getting the closest match of people and then scaling them up to the technology that you want to actually kind of put them for is very critical. So build and buy has been a go-to strategy for the last almost like 2.5 years on a much more stronger footing than the earlier years, Priyanka. So that's one part of the answer from my side. When it comes to volume hiring, it's a different game altogether, Priyanka. When you are hiring for volume, and then it's also how you plan backwards because you have to set your target because volume hiring generally gives you a target date on which you have to onboard the people or x volume of people to be onboarded by an x amount of time. So you have to generally track back in terms of how soon you need to kind of go about posting the jobs, like all the finer aspects of the jobs, and then reach an offer. And most importantly, planning for contingencies, right? Especially with a lot of renex happening in the market. How do I plan for my buffers properly? What are the other things that we have to do? And also, huge stakeholder management is very critical, Priyanka, because talent acquisition is one space where failures happen once in a while because of multitude of market conditions and other things. So making sure that we are throwing out these expectations and what's out there to our community of managers very, very critical. So that's how I generally go about it, Priyanka. I'm sure. Long answer short, strategy has to be changed according to the roles, whether it is a straightforward role or to a very complex role that you're working. But in most cases, it's about uh, rather than jumping into just going about hiring, sitting back and then doing a proper planning and consultations before you start a search. Because I've seen you yield results when you pause, then create the strategy and then go about the search rather than at the moment you hit a requisition, you just pack your bags and just start going for hunting for talent, right? Generally doesn't work.
Yeah, I think you've said it really well, Ajay. In order to make the best use of time and efforts, companies must first formulate a robust candidate sourcing strategy that offers sustainable and long term benefits. I would say, especially when hiring for a niche position, recruiters must spend some good time thinking about out of the box ideas rather than going for the traditional methods. I mean, you should use both of it, but you need to also go for the out of the box ideas as well. And the most important thing I feel is being human and authentic. It's key. And also, I've seen a lot of companies neglecting screening, which is a very crucial step, I would say, and a major make or break for the recruitment. And it often results in bad hires and costs the company in the long run, if screening isn't done properly. So when you're filtering the candidate pool and moving them along, to the next stage of the hiring process, what are some key parameters you consider? And do you have any checklists in mind, or how do you assess if they're a good fit? Is it through assessments or do you do a phone screen? What has worked well for you so far?
Uh, Bring assessment, like you rightly mentioned, is super key, right? In terms of one, um, finding the right talent out of all the people that apply. And you know that in India, when you open up an application, the sheer volume sometimes overwhelms the recruitment function, right? Like with one role, if I publish, yeah, won't be too surprised if I get more than 1,000 applications for that. And humanly, it is very difficult for a recruiter to kind of go through each application. Let's and then I'm being very realistic with one another, right? I don't think any recruiter would be having enough time to kind of go through 1,000 applications for one uh, advertisement which got published outside. That's where companies should invest on the right technology. Been a big fan of automation, especially in the screening process, because that's very, very critical from a market standpoint of view. One, if you have, and again, choosing the right tool is essential, but there are hundreds of good tools out there which are helping you on the AI automation screening process, which means that if you train the tool well, if you have thousands of application, at least the tool will tell a recruiter out of the 1,000, what would be the top 15 or 20 resumes that you need to be focusing on, right? So that's automation is the key. There is no shortcut to that. If you are expecting throwing more bodies at a solution or on this question, that's not going to be solving that issue at all, right? Because a company which is into a huge volume hiring, then it becomes even more difficult unless you don't have the right tools in place for the screening aspect. I'm talking about initial resume screening without even calling a candidate, right? So that you then logically put a smaller volume to the recruiter and the recruitment team to be reaching out, and then starts the human touch element. Priyanka, always been a big fan of phone screening. Reason being very simple, very easy to. And again, when you phone screen, it's not a random screening like just asking what would be the compensation, CTCs, notice period time. These are very basic checkpoints. Our phone screen should be more related to the job question. So one of the best practices that I tell all my recruitment team is when you have a job role which is open from a hiring manager side, also get a screening questionnaire from the hiring manager, which can be it's like if you're hiring for technical roles, get a technical screening question. You don't need to necessarily ask a candidate to kind of code in front of you, but there can be certain theoretical questions that you can ask and then figure out whether the candidate can actually kind of get the job done. So if proper phone screening of 10 to 15 minutes with the right questions yields you the right best of candidates. When you are into the volume hiring game, again, there are again other tools. For example, if you're going for a campus hiring, uh, you have hundreds and thousands of applications from where you can actually you end up selecting a smaller pool of people. That's where you need to have all your like recorded video interview sessions where you can assess the communication skill of the people. And I always tell my team also one thing: never look for 100% fitment on a job when you are screening. If you're getting even 70 to 80 percentage, make sure that you are giving the chance for the person to kind of go through the interview process, because people sometimes surprises you, not sometimes, most of the time surprises you, right? In terms of showing the right skill sets to kind of scale up their job. So ensuring that we are not looking for the 100% fitment, which is very critical, because it is not just the tech skills, right? You have a lot of like attitude plays a big importance. Your communication skill plays a big importance. So these are very big parameters that even the hiring managers and recruitment team has to keep in mind when you are screening, so that we give an equal bias. And before I have one last thing is about the bias aspect, right? The moment you are bringing in automation, you are practically eliminating a lot of bias on the screening process. For example, if a hiring manager generally sees a resume, let's assume that like it's a night shift job, and they see a female a candidate applying, it's a high probability that the person may reject the profiles, thinking that a woman may not be open for a night shift, right? So If you have a tool doing that job, then you automatically don't, you are eliminating the bias in the beginning itself. At least you're giving the right person the right chance to go through the interview process. Whether the person gets selected in the next level or not is a different question. But at least when from a screening standpoint of view, you have done your right job as a recruitment partner in terms of finding the right solutions.
Absolutely. Ajay, like you said, screening step must never be skipped and needs to be bias free as well. And recruiters sometimes decide to take shortcuts, which only creates problems with, selecting the right people, I would say. And one great thing I have noticed is that many organizations are now moving away from the concept of, culture fit to culture add. That's something I've really liked as well. So when it comes to interview process, companies need to prioritize more on the entire candidate journey and keeping it smooth and crisp. And a common mistake I think I have seen companies making is either having lengthy interview processes or interviewers going in unprepared, them lacking the knowledge about who and what they're assessing, I would say. So, how would you describe an effective interview process? And can you walk us through it as well? And what are some common errors you have noticed companies making in their interview process?
Yeah, Priyanka, like rightly mentioned, one candidate experience is the highest significance for a company. Whether you select a candidate or not, the the feel good factor that you give to a candidate while going through the process is very critical because of multitude of one reason. Basic human courtesy, making sure that somebody is made to feel good, because they are also investing their time going through the process of interviewing and other things, right? So that's one aspect. Second is actually the brand aspect, right? If you are giving a very bad experience to a candidate, the repercussions of that being magnified in the social media is very very high compared to, like, say, 5 years back, because our candidates and our people are also very they are also very, they know the market, right? For them, this initial sound bites. For example, I'm offering you Priyanka, and you have just seen me as a interview person, and maybe Anand was also in the panel, so both of us actually kind of took good care of you. But you would still go back to a social media platform and try to dig in a little more deeper into the company and its culture. And if you have the wrong sound bites, which are being projected over there by candidates who had bad experience, it automatically throws a seed in your mind. Am I joining the right company? Like, or is this culture the right culture? And forget the aspect. If somebody is writing that compensation is not great for the company, I'm fine with that. But if somebody is going there and writing that the interviewer was arrogant and I couldn't actually kind of take that interview thing, that's even more worse the feedback than a compensation related feedback. I'm talking about like the glass doors of the world, right? So you have to give that right experience to the candidate. And like you rightly mentioned, think interviews, the time of interview is not a very big significance, Priyanka, because depending on certain roles, some of our interviews may be slightly longer than usual. When I say longer, I'm talking about the duration of an interview. You may get interviewed for 1.5 hours, but and you may get interviewed 3 times before you get an offer. Let's assume you have 3 interviews, but am I doing all the 3 interviews within a short period of time is the biggest thing. The faster you go through the entire process, it's a better candidate experience, right? For example, you should not make a candidate wait 3 weeks before the next interview. Not a great feeling at all, because you are putting that candidate in a limbo. Think from an organization standpoint of view, right? If you are making somebody wait in the current market scenario, that person may be holding multiple offers, and in between, like, you're not giving any judgment or any feedback, that person would definitely go for another job and not wait for, like, people are not too brand conscious anymore. They are actually looking at what's the kind of career growth, what's the kind of jobs that is available in the market which will enhance my career. Logo significance has gone down significantly in the last couple of years, if you really think about that. Earlier, a lot of people used to be very excited to work for, let's say, Google or a Facebook, right? But if you really talk to the people now, for them it's more about career growth. Whether it is another company, they are absolutely fine with that. um, the excitement of logo has gone down because most companies have caught up with a lot of companies when it comes to with employee experience, right? So if you, for example, join a smaller firm, which may be a startup, they may be giving you all the benefits that a Google or a Facebook may be giving, or a Meta may be giving. But what's the kind of career growth I'm actually giving across to them? So going back to your question, the speed of process is very critical. Constant feedback is very, very important from a candidate experience standpoint of view. So at each stage of the process, letting the candidate know how the interview went, what was the feedback, what would be the next steps, and approximately how much time it's going to be taking for the candidate to finish the entire steps uh, during the process is important. And most importantly, at the time of reaching out to the candidate, if you can upfront tell that this interview, you would have 3 rounds of interview, which will last, let's say, 2 weeks time, and that's when we will have a feedback for you is very, very critical. The last thing I wanted to also mention, Priyanka, from a candidate experience is also the feedback mechanisms. 99% of the candidates that we interview are not selected, which is the bigger crowd. And most companies fail there by not giving the right feedback to the candidates. Like when I say right feedback, it need not be always somebody calling them and telling them that you've been rejected. It sometimes it becomes very difficult to kind of reach out to each candidate and give a very detailed feedback. At least making sure that you are dispositioning the candidates in the applicant tracking system so that they are getting a reject email from the company. That can be a decent feedback from a candidate standpoint of view. But as much as possible, if a recruiter or a hiring manager can share a short and sweet feedback, and I'm talking about a very constructive feedback on why a candidate got rejected, that itself is a big story. I want to recite one story to you from my previous past, right? There was a candidate who came for an interview with one of my earlier firms, badly got rejected because he was not even close to the DevOps role that we were hiring. So, and hiring manager spent around 15 minutes, and thankfully that was a face-to-face interview, so we had a little more time and patience to kind of do that. The hiring manager spent 15 minutes with the candidate and gave a very detailed feedback in terms of what were the missing areas that he had lacked during that interview process. By end of the interview process, the candidate mentions to him that I have an interview with Amazon coming up in next week's time. Can you help me prepare for that interview? Okay. So this panel went above and beyond to help the candidate get ready for an interview with another company. And trust me, that candidate cracked that interview and joined Amazon. 1.5 years later, this candidate applies again for our company, and that too for the same hiring manager. And we selected him, and we asked him, like, why did you actually kind of like even return back from a company like Amazon? He said the kind of experience that hiring manager gave me during the interview process is what made me successful in Amazon. And I was like preparing myself to kind of be as good as the candidate the manager wanted, so that I can rejoin back with him, because I could connect with that manager. He is somebody who I actually look up to. So one example of somebody who actually kind of changed people's life by just giving the right feedbacks, right? So there may be multiple stories out there, but this is one story which touched me very deeply, because you're talking about somebody who's just spent maybe half an hour, 1 hour giving the right feedback, and look at how that talent got attracted back to him. Maybe after some time, the gap may be there, but at the end of the day, he could actually kind of bring a talent back to the company who was significantly high quality. And look at the loyalty factor, right? If somebody like that joins your company, it will take a earthquake for the person to be leaving that company. So it's natural retention strategy, right? So that's how it works for you.
Yeah, I think you've beautifully put it, Ajay. And I really like this story because it's very relatable and it tells us about how important the candidate experience and the whole journey is. And recruitment is a two-way street, and it's absolutely critical that interviewers are on top form, as well as as well as the interviewees. Interviewers should go well prepared and ask clear and concrete questions, and follow up on their answers to probe deeper as well. But at the same time, it shouldn't be an endless monologue, I would say, because candidates must be encouraged to talk for most of the interview. And companies should make sure to organize and structure their interview process, and it should always be tailored to the role, streamlined by cutting out all the fluff, I would say. And I want to touch up a bit more on the candidate experience, which you talked about, and the whole feedback process, because nowadays providing top-notch candidate experience has become a must for companies. And feedback, like you said, is one of the crucial elements of candidate journey. Yet, I think it's often overlooked, I would say, and this can negatively impact their employer brand as well. So, I want to know from you, what are some key areas you would say companies should prioritize when it comes to candidate experience? And how can they effectively measure their efforts as well, to constantly improve it?
Great question, Priyanka. And I'll cite you the things that we are doing in Healthineers itself, because we give one of the best candidate experiences out there from a Healthineers standpoint of view. And I'll tell you how we are measuring and why I say we are good. Um, I'll start from the back, from the measurement standpoint of view, and then go back into the candidate experience. For so we have automated that process where if you have attended at least one interview with Healthineers, Priyanka, again, all of these are recorded in our applicant tracking systems. Um, every day there is an email. I'm talking about anybody who completed an interview on that day and their status is changed in the applicant tracking system. There's a survey that goes to the candidate. Just a short and sweet 1 minute survey, which asks them to kind of give a rating for the entire experience of interview with Healthineers. How was the hiring manager interaction? Um, and then key elements in terms of very basic aspect. Did you get the job description? Was the interviewer on time for the interview? Did you find the interview experience great? um, did you uh, did you get a feedback post the interview? Did you have to wait for some time in the bridge till somebody made you join? The final aspects of the entire interview, maximum of 5 to 7 questions, hardly takes a minute for them to do. And we also collect an NPS score in terms of the overall feedback on the interview. And the critical question, would you refer your friends across to Health in Years after this experience, right? So now we measure that. Our scores are like, if you understand the NPS score, we are always on and above 80 percentage when it comes, which is like a pretty brilliant score from a market standpoint of view. Okay, we didn't get those scores by sheer luck. We had to put in a lot of effort there, Priyanka, to get to that score. When we started, it was not that great, to be honest with you, because experience. See, one person can actually alter the entire score. If somebody has got a bad experience and there are 10 detractors, which comes out of 100, that changes your score drastically, right? So what we did is start off with a training of all our panels. Every panel who is actually kind of conducting an interview, we teach them what would be the right etiquettes to be done, how to break the ice. If you don't like a candidate, how to kind of end an interview, because most of our bad experiences usually come from people who are rejected, right? So you have to be a little more empathetic in the way you actually kind of handle uh, people who may not be the right fits for the job, and how we conclude and share the feedback for the people. So we mostly educated them. Then comes the branding element, Priyanka, and that's very critical, because when you apply for a job, Priyanka, you see something on the career website, right, of ours, and you apply for a job. Then something happens in the back end where a few of the candidates are rejected because of the lack of, or rather they may not fit into the right bill from a resume standpoint of view, rejected. You don't have to worry too much about that, because that's a natural part of the process. At least they got an email citing that your application was rejected, but keep looking at your career website, and if something comes up, to apply for that again, right? That's a standard response that most companies do. But when you start the interview screening process is where you have to be careful. So we actually have started creating amazing collaterals that goes to the candidates post the first interview screening, which will have a little more detailed job description, a lot more details about what Healthineers does, more than what you find on the website. A little more detailing about the projects that they are going to be interviewed for, which is not there on our website, because some of the things that you can't publish, you can practically give them as collaterals. What would be the kind of benefits that you're going to be getting if they are selected for Healthineers? Because we have the best in class benefits for the employee. So a lot of companies share the benefit related documents, maybe post the offer. We don't do that. We actually do that in the beginning itself, so that people do understand where they are actually getting into. Compensation is something that may be the only thing that we may not be discussing in the beginning, but rest everything is actually kind of being discussed. So that branding and collateral part is very, very critical, Priyanka, to create that good candidate experience. Then we have our standard pitches, right? From an interviewer standpoint, we have actually kind of taught them all during our training program. The fourth element is very important. A lot of us also work along with our vendor networks. Remember that, and they are not in your sheer control of reference, right? For example, if I'm making my team understand why it is why the branding is very critical, I have to do the similar kind of trainings for my vendor partners too. So, as a TA leader, I do quarterly once training for all my vendor partners, including their sourcing team who is calling our candidates, because when a vendor resource actually calls you, Priyanka, for a job, in from Healthineers, you never get a call stating that they are calling you from a third party vendor for a Healthineers job. They will tell you that they are calling you from Siemens Healthineers for a job with Siemens Healthineers. They will speak like my recruitment person because I've taught them how to do that, because that experience changes drastically when you do that. And when I spend 2 hours with them every quarter telling them what's happening in Healthineers, what's new to the business, they are practically speaking the same language that my recruiter is speaking when they are actually calling a candidate, which adds up to your candidate experience quite a bit, because then the candidate is actually directly speaking to somebody in health years and getting the job done, or rather the entire process, right? And then we have also educated each of our teams, including the internal talent acquisition team, my extended vendor partners, and also our interview panels, that feedback is the key, right? When you have an interview getting completed, make sure that even if it's a reject, call the candidate, or at least send a note, or inform them that they have been rejected. But again, with the positive note that if something comes up later, please apply for that. So that's how we actually operate. So measurement was the end result, but most importantly, for getting our great scores, we had to do a lot of disciplinary changes, a lot of changes from the way we are actually kind of interacting with the candidate, and that's all yielding the right results.
Yeah, I really liked how Siemens has put a very solid, strategy in place and is investing a lot of time and efforts in providing a very positive and good candidate experience. And it's great. And, companies can take a lot of tips in how they can build their entire candidate journey. And it's really important to share and get feedback from the candidates, especially from those who have been rejected or turned down the offers, to gain insights into what attracts and inhibits them as well, and constantly measuring with those metrics which really reflect the experience of your candidates is key. One thing I would like to add is the perfect candidate does not exist, so just go ahead and hire the one who fits really well with the company and aligns with the goals as well, I would say. And Ajay, I wanted to talk to you about onboarding, because very often onboarding is mistaken for a people pushing exercise, and companies don't understand that the process needs to go beyond sending a new hire some forms or company t-shirts or goodies. So having a structured onboarding process is very vital. So, according to you, what do you think are some key steps to successfully onboard a new hire?
Great question, Priyanka. That's where a lot of companies are, because the last 2 years has changed the way we onboard people also, right? Giving goodies is actually like an extension of what you're doing, but the overall experience is very critical. Few things to keep in mind. Post offer, when a candidate is actually kind of formally starting the onboarding process, right? One is how easy you are actually making the onboarding process is very critical, especially that's where the document collection comes into picture, and how you trigger your background verification checks and all are in place, right? So one, automation and having the right tools in place is very, very critical. So uh, how much time does a candidate need to spend for finishing off the onboarding formalities is one critical factor. I'm talking about not the day of onboarding, but just before that, there is a bit of a paperwork that all of us have to do from a India context, right? Especially in India, our paperwork is a lot more than a lot of other countries out there. So how you do that. And second is, don't ask for repeated information from a candidate. Very, very critical. A lot of companies ask the same information at multitude steps of the interview process. And also during the onboarding time, the same information being asked because of legal factors, because like dependent information asked at our at the company site as well as at the health insurance registration site, right? I'm just citing one example. Or if you actually kind of put experience for the last 3 or 5 years time, a lot of companies ask during their onboarding process with the help of the documents. But again, the BGV vendor asks for the same information from the candidate at the second stage. Really ticks off a candidate in a very bad way. So streamlining that, making sure that you're not irritating by the candidate by asking the same information again and again. The fourth factor being, are we asking the same question again and again at multiple stages of the thing? So let's actually kind of the, cut down the repetition so that we are actually kind of keep giving a great experience is one big factor, Priyanka. The finer aspects in terms of like, are we giving any goodies across to them? All of things are actually end up very, very different. We some companies can do it without them, some companies can do. But if you give something as a goodie or a thank you note at the time of joining, it's always a great factor. The third factor is very critical, your day one readiness, right? If you are actually kind of making sure that you are putting the people all ready when the first day of joining, their email IDs are all ready. If the ID cards are all ready, if the laptops are ready, on the first day, if you actually kind of make one person productive on day one itself, that itself is a great feeling for a candidate of making them feeling good about how you are actually kind of joining a company. That those are also how the HR team works along with your IT teams to ensure that the onboarding process is seamless. That way is very very critical. The fourth aspect is the onboarding experience, right? So when they reach the office on day one, uh, the, the 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 feeling of feeling welcome, right, in terms of how you are actually kind of getting onboarded. The set of people who are talking to them on the first day, like either virtually or in person, right? For example, if you look at Healthineers, now we have started our onboarding process in person. So anybody who joins across India on the first week itself is flown into the Bangalore headquarters to give them the onboarding experience from our side. So they spend 2 days. They take the tour of the office. The key people from the company spends time with them, taking them through the processes, understanding them the business. We even take them to our factories and labs to show them how the factory works, how the labs are getting operated. They may be IT developers who may not have nothing to do with the factory, but we want them to be seeing the other side of the world where whatever they are developing as codes is being translated into machines, right? So all of these are great experiences, and again, this would vary from company to company depending on the business that you are in. But most importantly, like I mentioned, that 1 or 2 days they have to be treated like VIPs, no doubt about that. And definitely, of course, post those days they have to be treated well because they are all our employees. But end of the day, those that experience on the day one and day two when they are finishing off all the formalities and being very or felt very welcome is very very critical, because that also goes a long way in terms of retaining them. Because one key factor that all of us to understand is that the highest chance of losing an employee is in the first 6 months to 1 year after them joining. So how you treat them in the initial days goes a long way.
Yeah, I really love the part where you've added the personalization aspect in the onboarding process and making the personal connection with them as well, and going beyond the usual steps which companies take in the onboarding. Employees usually start to feel adrift and ignored when a company does not make onboarding a priority, and especially if the process takes forever, like you said. And communication is key, and for both organization and employee to have clarity of the goals and expectations set from day one, and to be on the same page is really important. And I think recruiting top talent takes a combination of creativity and diligence. So it's vital to have a solid recruiting strategy in place. But most companies, I feel, lack clarity in their objectives and goals, which often leads to failures of their recruiting strategies. So if you're developing a full cycle recruiting strategy, what are some of the factors or aspects you ensure you always incorporate, and how do you keep track of your efforts? Do you have any metrics which you can share with us from your experience so far?
Great question, Priyanka, because see, TA is more of a number related game, right? So metrics plays a key importance in terms of doing that. We'll come to the metrics later, but let's talk about the strategy element, right? So, like I mentioned in the beginning of our discussion, right? Strategy we devise depending on the role that we are hiring for, Priyanka. So your metrics would be depending on the strategy that you create, because the metrics that I would have for a, let's say, leadership level hiring would be very different from a volume hiring versus a niche field hiring. So let's get that clarified first so that all of us are actually clear in terms of that. Strategy is something that cannot be blueprinted every time. Like if you have same role, you don't. A lot of our leaders copy paste strategies, which is not very great. Priyanka. So you have to kind of fine tune your strategies. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to write the strategy end to end every time you get something, but before you actually kind of get into any hiring, like I mentioned, we have a standard process. Let me story tell how it happens in Healthineers, for example. We have a very standard process when somebody opens an acquisition. The within the first 48 working hours, our recruiter is supposed to be sitting along with our hiring managers and coming up with a planning and consultation document. There's a standard format for that. We want both of them to be sitting together and filling that and getting it sorted out and sign off on that, most importantly. And that also is our strategy document in terms of how that hiring is going to be going. So predominantly in that meeting, a little more clarity on the role is got by the recruiter. The recruiter also shares the market realities, market intelligence for that role before the meeting happens. And in that meeting, they also sign up who would be the panels, who would be doing, what would be the volume of panels that is available for the interviews. So all the finer aspects of things are also covered there. Priyanka. So once that is being taken care of, this document is also uploaded on our applicant tracking system from a tracking standpoint of view. So basically, everything is in one place where we know this meeting has happened. These are the things that has been discussed and signed off. And at some point of time during the course of the search, if a hiring manager wants to uh, change a skill set or something, we treat that as a new search because you can't keep changing the target after you started shooting, right? That's a very unfair thing to do from a TA standpoint of view. So that's a standard process that we follow within here, Priyanka. So strategy is mostly devised at the time of our planning and consultation meeting, so that is being signed off. Secondly, from a strategy standpoint of view, when you create a strategy, our team also creates a project plan on achieving that because talent acquisition is very event driven, right? You exactly know it's a pretty similar life cycle that we follow. Like, for example, somebody opens a requisition, getting the resume screened, interview first level, interview second level, final level interviews, offer stage, um, post offer, candidate engagement, and onboarding. These are very these are standard things that will not change if related to any roles out there in the market from a hiring standpoint. Depending on each stage, we would have a metrics in place, Priyanka, and that's what we'll be measuring and communicating to the business too. Our standard metrics would be how our hit ratios in terms of resumes when it comes to volume level hiring. I'm talking about, are we getting enough selects from the number of interviews we are selecting, or rather, we are actually kind of doing from a market standpoint of view. Reason being very simple: if you are not hitting your target with so many numbers, there can be two things which are going wrong. One, our team is not giving the right set of profiles to the hiring manager, or hiring manager is actually kind of being too picky or uh, looking for the perfect fit for, so that they are actually kind of also forgetting the market realities, right? So this metrics also helps us in going back and having constructive discussions with the hiring managers to figure out where are we going wrong somewhere and whether we are actually kind of getting that done. Comp also plays a big part. So the compare ratios of candidates that we are submitting, offering, the kind of sources that we are tapping onto the information, how many people who have applied for the job, geotagging of candidates in terms of where all the people have applied from. So there are hundreds of metrics that can be followed. But like I mentioned, depending on the role that we are hiring for, we actually kind of project the right set of metrics to the hiring manager and to the stakeholders to have the right decisions.
I completely agree. Perfecting hiring requires continuous effort and it's not a one time task. And a constantly optimized recruitment process and strategy will definitely go a long way in hiring top talent. Ajay, you're a DEI leader as well, and you have to set an example and actively promote diversity in the workplace, and ensure recruiting strategies attract diverse candidates as well. So, can you give us a bit of insight on how you do this effectively every day, and what tweaks do you make in your entire recruiting strategies to attract more of the diverse talent?
Great question, Priyanka. DE&I is actually a big agenda item for all companies, and that's the right thing to do from a company standpoint of view, right? Because you need equal representation, you need an inclusive culture within the company, right? And the equity also that brings along with that, right? So very critical parameters. We have gone too far away from the older ways of looking at diversity, where you are looking only from a gender standpoint of view. Gender is definitely one of the key elements, but there are other segments also we need to kind of currently look into, right? Like, for example, let's say LGBTQ as a population, or people with disabilities, or let's say people who are coming from the veteran background. And now diversity has even taken a lot bigger route where even religion and caste also are coming into picture, right, from a context standpoint of view. So and the kind of there are hundreds of diversity factors there, Priyanka, but most companies are focusing on lot of elements. But again, remember one thing: pick up the right diversity, pick or rather picking up the right diversity metrics and goals has to be specific to your organization and the kind of roles you are hiring. I want that to be highlighted to every leader out there or people who are managing the teams, because all companies cannot do all diversity. Let's be honest with each other in terms of doing that. Pick out what is critical, pick out what is doable, but always put some stretch goals out there. When you are actually kind of also doing all these diversity related initiatives, don't forget your internal folks also, because they may need a lot of hand holding. Sensitization is a very big element onto it, the entire thing, Priyanka, because when you start any sort of diversity related programs, there is a lot of bias that may come into your picture, right? For example, I've seen a lot of companies where they earmark roles for diversity hiring. Okay, suddenly one hiring manager may come and tell you that because of this, I am losing good people or good candidates who may be more competent. Okay, so having the right storyline on why we need to start earmarking certain roles or why we are doing that is very critical, because they should not feel any bias or maybe unnecessary reasons which are being put in front of them for, or other arm twisting on why we need to kind of get that. And so the diversity agenda has to be very clearly articulated across to all your segments, and it has to be a top down approach, because you need management blessing, and most importantly the management need to speak the same language on diversity as the rest of the organization and HR team specifically, right? So very very critical. Like I mentioned, again going back to my earlier point, right, when you're clearly articulating what diversity hiring that you need to do from a market, ensure that you actually define that very carefully. Like if you look at Healthineers, we have now started off with LGBTQ hiring. Again, when I say hiring, we don't go and pull the trigger of hiring in one go. We first have to sensitize the entire organization, and then we go about hiring. And you can't just attract people from other communities unless they also find it as a safe place to work from a community standpoint of view, right? So you have to, it has to be a natural process. You can't just go tomorrow to the market and say that we are a very LGBTQ friendly company. If you are a, if you are from the community, join us, and it's a great place to work. It doesn't work like that. That messaging has to go properly from the people of our company. There has to be evidences that has to be put across to the market stating that we are an inclusive company, right? Does it reflect on our policies, for example? Is our hiring managers speaking the same thing? Do we have enough allies within our company who's speaking the same language? These are very critical from a hiring standpoint of view. Then it comes to the infrastructural element of the business, right? For example, if you're going for a hiring PW talent, do we have the right, for example, right ramps to go? Do they have the right paths to kind of go around the office? Do they have specific restrooms which can be used with their disabilities, right? These are very very critical from a, so as a TA leader, is not just the hiring aspect. You have to also look at your other policies which are supporting. Are the hiring managers and the people around you inclusive in terms of hiring these people? Once we hire, are they going to be getting a good experience within the company? Tomorrow, somebody, we should not just go about hiring some. Let's assume that we hire a LGBTQ community member into our company, and somebody makes a derogatory remark against them, and the person resigns and then writes against the company on a social media page. Think about the repercussions of those things, right? It can be more than the legal aspect. It's a very bad image on the culture of the company, right? So getting the company ready is very very critical, Priyanka. Metrics automatically comes into place, right? For example, you put your goals. For example, we have put a goal that next 2 years time we're going to be hiring 2% of our hiring, or rather 2% of our total headcount through um, diversity hiring, excluding the gender, because gender is a different agenda. But apart from female staff from the other communities, we have to hire at least 2% of the headcount. It's one of the goals that we have actually kept to ourselves. How we go about that is a different, like that's a different strategy altogether. But like I said, pick up the right ones to kind of tackle each time and then go about it.
Yeah, I think getting the company ready as well as having the clarity on who you want to attract and how you want to go about it is really key, like you said. And if companies today want to attract the best talent, they need to have a diverse, workforce. And it also can give you an edge over, your competitors as well. And it's no longer a vague or a less important goal. It's become a deal breaker for most of the candidates, I would say. companies need to make sure that their employer brand showcases their diversity because candidates value transparency more. But I think it all comes down to relationships and personalization in recruiting, and fostering a long-term relationship with past applicants as well as the potential candidates is very critical. And it also helps in building and maintaining a strong pipeline as well. So what are your thoughts on this, and any lessons you can share with us from your personal experience?
Priyanka, we'll answer that in two ways, right? One, our current set of applications, no doubt we have to clearly take care of them in a really good manner. Past applicants is something that each company has to think through a little more further, because at this point of time, the right set of tools and data privacy related issues actually doesn't allow you to keep too much of older data in your databases. And secondly, world is changing from a data standpoint of view, and people aspirations and values change. But end of the day, how we are running the programs for people who are earlier applicants vary from company to company depending on the roles that you're hiring. Um, if you look at Healthineers, for example, we don't have any strong programs which are running for reaching out to the older application. That's something that we have not done that effectively, maybe because of multitude of reasons, but it's a great idea, Priyanka. Maybe something that we can actually kind of look up to bringing something. I've seen a couple of leaders in the market do that very neatly, in terms of tapping across to your older applicants and seeing whether they have regenerated their interest towards the company a little more better in the next coming years. But we do tap on our alumni. When I say alumni, I'm talking about people who left us, right? So that's something that we tap very regularly, um, in terms of letting them know about what's happening within our company, what's the kind of job applications we are getting within. Is there anybody from their circle they can actually refer across to? These are things that we do from an alumni standpoint of view. But older candidates is something that we have to definitely do a lot of improvement in the way we are currently working. Maybe I'll take that as a takeaway, Priyanka, for us to be working towards.
Yeah, I think recruiters should really take the time to understand what their candidates want, need, and absolutely must haves. They need to be the recruiter they can trust, mainly prioritize communication, and you're more likely to communicate effectively with candidates if you're a good listener as well, and that'll make them feel more valued as well. So, before we wrap up our conversation, Ajay, I wanted to ask, your experience in the industry goes back to more than 2 decades. And so, can you tell us a bit about how the industry has changed over time, from the time when you had started out and to fast track to today? And can you also share with us any lessons you have learned that have helped you gain new perspectives as well as changed your approach to the industry?
Huh, that's going back a lot of years, Priyanka. But let me put it this way: instead of going back all the 20 or 22 odd years, let's actually kind of go back just 5 years, right? Because that's where the industry has been disruptive in the way I'm talking purely from an IT standpoint of view, healthcare as a domain. And pandemic actually added fuel onto the fire in the way the industry has changed too, right? So, and let's speak purely from an India context for the next couple of minutes. Um, Market has really changed in terms of how they are looking at talent right now, right? Slowly, India has always been a go-to market when it comes to cheaper talent, if I want to put it that way. Everybody found India as a lower cost option when it comes to investing in IT. So that's why you will find a lot of companies opening their global development centers over here and opening. But then last 2 years, a lot of people have suddenly realized that because of pandemic and sheer demand, slowly we are moving away from that bracket of cheaper destination to kind of get the IT talent to where we can get good quality talent to get your job done. Because competency always plays a big mark in their society, right? So that has drastically changed, Priyanka. So the outlook on the world in terms of how they looked at India as a go-to market on cost versus competency has completely changed in the last, let's say, at least 5 years time. People have now started talking about, like, if you see, a lot of companies have started opening R&D centers in India. If you look at Healthineers, for example, we have our largest R&D center based out of India location. uh, and a company like Siemens to kind of open an R&D center out itself tells you why we are doing. It's not because of cost parameters we have done that, because we get the most brilliant minds in India to do your R&D work, right? And these are cutting edge work that we are doing over here. Around 50 to 55% of all the codes which are running in any Siemens Healthineer machine across the world is manufactured in India. And innovations which are being done on the technology, right, is all being like there's a lot of investment and growth opportunity which are happening in India from a road standpoint of view. So, like I mentioned, competency is changed completely. The second is actually the kind of people that is being there in the industry. If you go back, let's say 5 to 10 years back, um, the kind of people who are in the industry, I'm talking about the coders and developers who are there, the way they actually kind of move around in the market from the way they enhance their skills has had drastically changed. Self learning has taken a big route in India in the last 5 to 10 years time, if you ask me. Um, Earlier, if you go to a college, you may find graduates who may be just uh, having knowledge on C++ or whatever it is taught on the curriculum. But when you go to a college or a campus right now, you suddenly see kids who are even better developers than what you find in some of the companies out there, because they have gone above and beyond. It's not that anybody is pushing them, or it is their passion. They have a lot more nimble in terms of their learning. And secondly, they are a lot more career oriented. They know exactly where they want to go in their life, right? So if they are into coding, they know exactly which technology to code. They start scouting the internet and start learning on their own. Some of the test results that we get from our campuses are flabbergasting. I'm not kidding with you. Like, we were looking at an off-campus hiring, and we were thinking about a build and buy program for Siemens Healthineers. Like, I'm talking about like a month-old story over here. We wanted to hire some 15 to 20 odd smart graduates from the industry and train them in C sharp and C++ and put them onto projects. That's the assignment that I got. So what we did is we went about doing an off-campus hiring where they had a hackathon test. Hundreds of thousands of applications came around close to some 8,000 people wrote the exam for that. And what we found is that the people that we selected, we didn't even spend $1 on them for training. They were already very well trained. So, and we were surprised just because none of them had them as a curriculum inside any of their campuses. So when we started talking to these kids, when we selected them, the only question I asked them is, where did you learn this? Like, how did you actually enhance this? Because it's not something that is being taught. So 90% of the answer was YouTube. They actually kind of learned that to YouTube. And when they saw the advertisement coming for Healthineers, they actually just applied and then did the coding. So that's the big change, Priyanka, because we are a huge talent-rich country, and that has changed drastically in the last 5 years because people have started utilizing internet quite strongly. The young minds are very, very amazing compared to maybe 10 years back. The communication skill have drastically gone up in the last 5 to 7 years time in the India industry. When I say communication, majority of the people who we are finding from the market are pretty much higher than average compared to a couple of years back. So uh, that actually adds value to us as a country, because communication is one of the key things in IT industry. Right? Way we run our Scrum meetings, how way we actually interact with our partners and clients outside our outside India. Right? These are very, very key factors. And then last thing I want to actually also enhance is the focus on domain. um, Earlier everybody used to kind of like, any job you get you are happy. Now it's no longer the case. A lot of our IT folks are very choosy in terms of sticking on to certain domains. It's called sharpening the saw, right? They are, if, for example, if you look at me, I am passionate about healthcare. I want to be in healthcare only. I don't want to change my domain. Like that, I see everyday developers or coders who come saying that I have joined you from Philips, because Philips I was with healthcare domain and I didn't want to change my domain. I'm good at what I'm doing right now from a coding standpoint of view, but for me, domain is more important than coding, because they understand that if you actually kind of understand a domain, then your coding becomes easier because you relate to your customer problems a lot more better than anybody else, right? So domain is adding a huge significance now, Priyanka. So last 4 5 years, those would be the key things. Money is a secondary factor. All of them are getting much higher paid than earlier times, but that's a natural progression which is happening, and market corrections which are happening because of demand and other things. And I believe a lot of things which are happening in the market right now is a fair statement to do, because they suddenly realize the value of what they are carrying across. Um, COVID just added uh, fuel onto the fire. That's the only thing I can say. But most importantly, we are becoming very, very strong as an IT IT sector in India with a lot of domain experience. So be any domain, you talk about any domain, we have expertise in India right now, and we can actually kind of code for that.
Yep, amazing. That brings us to the end of our conversation. And I had a wonderful time chatting with you, Ajay, and you've shared some really valuable insights with us today. And we had a deep conversation on a lot of burning topics, I would say. So thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. I really appreciate the time and enjoyed the conversation.